Hello, and welcome to the Artificial Podcast, with your host Nick Myers.
Artificial
intelligence,
voice recognition, machine learning,
robotics,
actionable analytics.
It is Nick's goal to help everyone understand how AI and voice technology are reshaping our lives both personally and within organizations. Your glimpse into the growing world of AI and voice first starts now.
Nick Myers.
Nick Myers. Nick Myers.
Nick Myers.
Welcome to the Artificial Podcast. My name is Nick Myers, and I am here to help break down topics in emerging technology, artificial intelligence, and voice assistant tech to help everyone understand how these technologies are impacting our lives both personally and within our organizations. The Artificial Podcast is brought to you by Red Fox AI. Red Fox AI helps give brands a voice by leveraging the power of AI and voice assistant technologies like Alexa and Google Assistant. If you or your organization is interested in sponsoring an episode, please send an email to the Artificial Podcast at redfox-ai.com. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere that you stream podcast episodes. You can also follow the Artificial Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube by searching for the Artificial Podcast. You can join our brand new Facebook group exclusively for listeners of the show, where you can meet other artificial podcasters from around the world who are interested in emerging technology just like you. A link to our Facebook group has been included in the episode notes. Thank you for listening, and now a quick word from our sponsors before we jump into this week's episode. Hey, Brett.
What's up, Nick?
You know, on the Artificial Podcast, we talk a lot about the future of conversational AI and voice assistant technologies, right?
So you mean basically in every episode we do?
All right, wise guy. But seriously, think about it. I don't think we truly realize how quickly voice assistants like Alexa, Google Assistant, Siri, Cortana, and Bixby, just to name a few, have embedded themselves in our daily lives. I mean, the analysts are predicting that in a little more than 3 years, there will likely be 8 billion, yes, billion, voice assistant users connected to nearly 2 billion global websites, more than 40 billion connected devices.
Okay, yeah, that's a lot. But what are you trying to get here, basically?
Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is that for numbers like these to truly become a reality, a few things need to happen.
Yeah, like more technology innovations?
Well, yes, but I'm thinking of something more, something even more important. We need to have trust. Trust between the users and the technology itself.
Okay, yeah, I'll be honest. Sometimes I daydream about these voice assistants getting smart enough to rise up and take over like Skynet, from Terminator.
Well, I mean, yeah, sure, that could happen, I suppose, but I'm talking about things like trustworthy privacy and trustworthy accessibility and trust that if you're a business, you have full rights to your name and your brand. Have you heard about the Open Voice Network?
No, I haven't. Can you tell me a little bit more about them?
I would love to, Brett. Well, in a nutshell, the Open Voice Network is a non-profit directed fund of the Linux Foundation that is dedicated to making voice assistants worthy of user trust. Members of the Open Voice Network include conversational AI designers, strategists, developers, and other industry professionals from all around the world who are dedicated to paving the way for a future where voice can be trusted and benefits everyone. I'm proud to say that I've been a member since early this year, and it has truly been one of the best decisions I have made since becoming a voice practitioner. And if you're in the industry, I highly encourage you to check it out and join.
Sweet. That sounds cool. So what you're saying is Skynet isn't going to happen?
Oh, Brett.
If you are interested in learning more about the Open Voice Network and how you can get involved, visit www.openvoicenetwork.org or send an email to john.stein@openvoicenetwork.org. The Open Voice Network. Voice assistants worthy of user trust.
Hey there, artificial podcasters. Welcome back to another week and another episode of the Artificial Podcast. This week's guest is Lawrence Lin from the China Netcasting Service Association. And I've had the pleasure of getting to know Lawrence over these last couple of months now through a lot of the work that we have jointly been doing in the Open Voice Network. And when it comes to anything that's really happening in voice tech in China and Asia, Lawrence is kind of the go-to for OVN. John Stein, who currently is the executive director of that organization, always loops Lawrence into a handful of different conversations to get his perspective, just because of the nature of the work that Lawrence does. So before Lawrence and I start chatting here, let me tell you a bit about Lawrence Lin. Lauren is the International Affairs Coordinator for the China Netcasting Service Association. CNSA is China's industry association for voice-first content and the voice tech industry. He is an advocate for voice-first applications in the Chinese market. Lawrence also helps support international voice tech companies that launch and choose to develop their businesses in China. Lawrence's goal is to help bridge the gap between voice tech ecosystems of the East and the West to help foster an international and interconnected voice tech market. Lawrence, welcome to the Artificial Podcast. How are you?
Good to be here, Nick. It's a pleasure. And good morning, good afternoon. Look forward to our conversation today.
Right? We were just talking about that because for me, it's 8 p.m. Central Time right now on Thursday, the 20th. And for you, I think it's about 9 a.m. on the 21st, right?
Yes, correct.
And I think I mentioned this to you, and I talk a lot about this with my guests, but just how amazing it is that I can interview someone like yourself who is currently based out of Beijing, China, and we can have a full-blown interview using the technology tools available to us today. It still just blows my mind.
Absolutely. I mean, from the position that I work in, a lot of dialogues I'm having happens to be cross time zones. And I think we are at a good time in history where we have the technology and the means to have these conversations and to have them in a good quality, high quality setting. So I think we're living in good times.
I agree with you 100%, in light of everything going on too. I mean, just how much that video conferencing has helped to change everything and just have, rapidly changed the world of work and how we're able to just meet with people and conduct dialogue and different things is just incredible. So I agree with you 100%. Again, still blows my mind. And I think it's super cool that you're in Beijing and I'm in Madison, Wisconsin, and we can do this. So, but to kick things off here, what inspired you to get involved in the voice tech industry and how did that ultimately lead you to your current role at CNSA?
Right. So before I joined the CNSA voice committee, I was not, I wasn't a early adopter by far in the voice industry. I wasn't, I would even say not, I wasn't even an early believer in voice. It was until after I joined CNSA in my role as the International Affairs Coordinator, seeing how voice has developed over time and able to commercialize both within China and globally, that I began to see the true potential of voice, not just as a novelty item where I used to think it was, but as a important and crucial piece of technological advancement that will have an impact on all aspects of not just personal life, but also the way we do things. And certainly I think that is fortified by the pandemic. But since I've joined CNSA voice committee, I've begun to see more application in voice that I didn't previously think was possible.
Yeah, no, that's really fascinating. And for you, did you have prior experience working in tech, or have you done anything in tech, or was it kind of a light bulb moment that I often hear so many of the guests that I bring on the show have when it comes to voice technology or the other technology they're working with? Did you have an experience like that?
Of course. I've always been interested in the new technology, emerging technologies.
Right.
And I'm certainly interested in those. But voice really wasn't something that I thought was that was on top of my list, of course. But I think it was really when I started to interact with, right? When I was still in college back in the US, I remember my roommate, one of my best friends, during Black Friday got an Amazon Echo, and that's really our first intro to a voice technology. And I thought back then, right, in the very early days, I still thought, okay, it's a cool piece of technology, but it wasn't doing a lot of the, it wasn't going to be it wasn't going to replace anything that I'm already doing. It was fun to interact with, but it wasn't important. It wasn't a necessity. But of course, as voice started to develop, and then when I returned to China and started to see what voice tech was doing within the Chinese market and the many applications that happened, And when I was in CES earlier this year, right, in-person conferencing, which I think it's I feel so distant for us now, but when I start to meet with colleagues in the US and seeing use cases, and that's when I really begin to believe voice tech could become an essential part to our daily life.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring up what your one of your first experiences was with an Amazon Echo device, because for me that was the case too. And people who listen to this are probably sick of me telling this story, but for me it was back in early 2018, and I had gotten one of them for the holidays and had no idea what to do with it. I thought, of course, for me, I guess that's early days, and I guess in retrospect, looking at the industry, it kind of was too in a way. But that was my first experience with using Alexa and using an Echo device. And out of all the things I did with it, I ordered toilet paper. Something so simple, but having the ability to just do that and conduct my transaction in about 15 seconds or so was just mind blowing to me.
Right.
So yeah, I feel like so many people have kind of had those similar experiences, because it's like a no-brainer, right? Like something that can help you accomplish a goal in a matter of seconds, versus the couple minutes that it would even take on your smartphone is just amazing. And I agree with you. Over time, we've seen more use cases. But you're right. Back in 2018, even, and probably depending on when you had your first experience, it was like there was no compelling reason, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But as I dive into the industry and seeing what the industry players are doing and seeing voice tech being put in action, I begin to slowly believe, and now I certainly do believe that voice is going to certainly develop as a necessity to our daily lives.
Absolutely. So, with that in mind, what is the current state of the voice tech market in China and maybe greater Asia, if you can speak to that? Like I think I mentioned, you're one of the first people I can actually get some perspective on about what the state of the voice tech market is in Asia and China. How many voice tech providers or assistants are currently available for consumers to use, and just what is the state of the industry out in your neck of the woods?
Absolutely. I think, thinking about the state of voice tech in China, I think the word that we are looking for would be complex. I mean, it is a large, the voice tech industry really developed in 2019, right? In 2019, we saw a historic high in the shipment of smart speakers. And that's when we really start to see consumers embracing voice tech in their homes and use them to, and really starting to integrate voice into their daily routine. So in China, right, the voice tech industry is quite large. And I, when I talk about this, I usually separate them into several bigger categories. We have the sort of the voice ecosystem providers. These are the large tech companies that have invested heavily into voice technology, right? Most notably are Baidu, Xiaomi, and Tmall, and Alibaba, with their Tmall Genie. So these three tech firms lead in smart speaker shipments, and they lead in smart speaker and IoT integration and so forth. We have the voice first content providers, which are companies that we initially interacted with. So these are companies that provide initially by integrating radio contents directly into mobile devices, but as voice tech started to develop, right, integrating podcasts, integrating specially designed contents for a voice-first world, and also live voice contents. We have companies that operate more in a technological facing environment. These are not necessarily consumer facing, but they do create a lot of the important voice technology that is used by other companies. Most notably, we have companies like iFlyTech, like AI Speech, that creates a lot of the foundational NLP, TTS, and so forth, right? The technological backbone of voice that they provide to other companies. We have, of course, companies that operate in the car space that's been heavily invested in voice as well. Most notably, car companies that's emerged in just the past few years, right? So we have companies like NIO, like Lishang. These are car startups, right? That sort of started that started with the electric car wave, and that's also been heavily embracing voice as a crucial way for driver to interact within their automobiles. We have companies that operate in the IoT and smart home space that, of course, see voice as an important way to control all aspects of the home. And these already start, expands from tech companies like Xiaomi to traditional home appliance manufacturers like Gree. And also, of course, we have wearables and mobile companies like Huawei, like Oppo, like Vivo, that invested heavily in wearable technologies that you can interact with by voice. So it is quite a large ecosystem,
Yeah.
and it has come a long way, right? In 2019, that's really the year that it broke out with really cheap smart speakers that really became accessible form of consumer goods for general Chinese consumer.
I was going to say, based on what you're describing there, it almost seems like every market in in some way, shape, or form is already starting to be covered because, my point of reference, of course, is North America. And yeah, we see a lot of the smart speakers here, maybe some wearable tech, but outside of that, you don't see too many smart home integrations. You don't see too many appliance integrations. I mean, some televisions and other pieces of tech have them, but it's in very specific verticals as to where what you're describing out in China and Asia, it already is encompassing a ton of different industries and a ton of different verticals, which is really fascinating, actually, I think.
I think absolutely. One of the important or unique aspects of the Chinese tech voice market that I often speak about and I wrote about as well is its ability to penetrate into lower tier cities, right? These are cities where consumers have a low level of internet literacy. They have access to the internet, but they don't have access to the tools in which they can browse the internet. For a few reasons. One is that mobile and laptops, computers are expensive to purchase. It's not accessible by everyone, especially when you go to lower tier markets. And then the second issue is with internet literacy. Even if people have access to these tools, and they might find it difficult to learn how to use them. But with voice, it's very different. It solves both of these problems. First of all, smart speakers and other voice-first hardwares, like smart displays, are very cheap to purchase. Tech companies here in China and like the U.S., right? They subsidize the prices of smart speakers,
Right.
so consumers can purchase one very cheaply, and anyone can own one. And second of all is with the issue of internet literacy. Voice is probably the most natural way humans interact with each other. And when it comes to technology, that is also the case. So there's no need to learn how to interact with technology. You simply speak to it. And that form of very natural interaction solved the problem of internet literacy. So people in lower tier cities, even if they have no access previously or exposure to technology or to devices, they can really quickly onboard to a voice-based device and get connected to the internet.
That's really interesting. So what you're saying is people who live in lower tier markets, lower tier cities, and maybe even some rural areas, it's almost as if the internet and other pieces of tech are becoming democratized through these smart speakers for people, right? Is that what you're saying?
More or less, right? It's something
Yeah.
that is cheaper to use and something that is easier to use, and that is quite popular. And especially with the pandemic, we have a lot of kids stuck at home, right? Earlier in the year, and education at home, it might not be accessible to everyone, especially in rural areas where their parents' level of education might not be sufficient to teach their kids, and that's where smart speaker also kick in, right? Providing high quality education, high quality conversational education, I might say, which is only possible, I think, with the growth and development of voice technology.
Absolutely. And are you finding too that there's more consumer use and consumer targeted voice platforms? Are there any B2B as well? What are you noticing out in China?
Oh, there's both of them, right? I think depending on which industry you're looking at, and there's definitely a lot of businesses that's embraced voice, and there's definitely a lot of consumer use cases where voice has been quite helpful.
Nice. So what are some of the most common things that you see people using voice assistants for in China? Are people using them just for the basics at the moment? Kind of like, there seems to be this average trend happening globally, or are you noticing that people are starting to experiment with them beyond just the basics to more advanced and maybe even in some cases expert level functionality.
Absolutely. I think the basics functions are still the most popular, right? I think, when you look at voice in China and consumer usage, there isn't, in some verticals, you would see consumer interacting with voice more so than just the basic functions, but it's not an entire, it's not an industry-wide use case. So so definitely in some verticals like in education, like in controlling a smart home, voice has become quite a go-to. I mean, it's become quite popular. It's still not don't get me wrong, people aren't, not every consumer going home and talking to their smart speakers to control their lights or
Right.
but that's certainly a path forward. We're seeing, IoT and voice controlled smart homes is definitely becoming quite popular. Again, there's the price factor, the level, the prices, the amount of investment you need to have to convert your home into a smart home has become relatively cheaper than than a few years ago.
Right.
So for the average consumer, you can begin putting smart light bulbs, putting smart curtains, connecting your air purifier, connecting your kitchen, your stove to a voice, to a smart speaker. So that's becoming cheaper and easier. So we're certainly seeing consumers more and more so embracing a voice-controlled smart home. With education, where we're seeing more of that as well, especially given the pandemic that's happening. A lot of the kids, because they're stuck at home, smart speakers and smart displays have become quite a good medium for kids to interact and to continue their education at home. So definitely in some verticals, we are seeing, in some verticals compared to others, we're seeing consumer embracing voice more so.
Yeah, because a lot of the recent research that is coming out, again, it kind of depends on what region of the world the research is conducted. But at least some of the reports in the U.S., of course, are still showing that people are, they're starting to use it more due to the pandemic and being at home more and just wanting to experiment. But in a lot of studies, it still seems like a lot of people are using them, play music, set timers, ask basic questions, different things like that. So I was just curious to see if people are still kind of using it for that basic functionality, or if they're starting to adopt it, for more advanced purposes, which it sounds like maybe on the smart home front, that appears to be happening a bit, because I want smart curtains. Where do I get smart curtains? I don't know if we have that here, but I want it.
They're quite accessible. I think, last time I checked, you can buy one, quite cheaply online, and you can fit it onto your, that's one thing, right? Xiaomi, as an example, has done a very, very good job at this, right? And, we're talking about democratization of technology, right? Having it at a lower price point definitely open it up to more potential customers. And Xiaomi has been doing a good job at that, providing cheap, cheap smart home solutions. I was at their Beijing campus a few months ago, and they have a smart home sort of demo area, right? They sort of created a home in on their campus, sort of to display what's possible.
Yeah.
So they would have living rooms and then bedrooms, they're all carved out, and they will provide a price point for the entire smart home solution for that section. And to be honest, they are quite cheap. If you were to get a smart home solutions for your entire home or for just certain parts of your home, the price point is quite low. So I think that's one of the key reasons why IoT has been pushed out rather successfully.
Yeah, I can see that being a very big driving factor. I'm trying to think at least in the US, what the cost would be to kind of outfit your home. Like say, for example, I wanted to make my apartment that I live in more of a smart home. Like I've invested in some of the smart plugs where I can turn my lights on and off. Those are about $30 US per pop. Of course, you can get the smart displays that range anywhere from $100 up to $200, and the light bulbs. So, I can see cost being a huge part of that, right? Because if you truly want to make your home a smart home, you're going to need to invest in every IoT device to make that possible. So that's really interesting that Xiaomi, you said that the company out there is really focusing on price to get it down to a point that people can rapidly adopt. That's interesting.
Exactly. Right. I think another aspect other than pricing is the right, the ability for a company to showcase a sort of smart home solution in place, right? So if you were, if you want to get something, there is where you can go and where you can find all of the smart home hardwares. Not only where you can find them, but that if you purchase something from the same ecosystem, it will, you will come home and you can plug and it will work. So I think that also drives a high rate of adoption. And we're seeing, right, just a few months ago, Alibaba announcing they are also investing heavily in IoT, and Baidu signed a strategic partnership with a large Chinese appliance manufacturer. So I think definitely for the leading tech firms, IoT is an important racetrack, and it's something they're all doubling down on.
Yeah, and maybe that's a good segue into my next question here. So, looking at the scope of all the different verticals and industries that you talked about, that voice is starting to weave its way into in China. It seems like does China have a lot of voice tech startups, or is the technology mostly being driven by Baidu, Alibaba, Xiaomi, and some of the other ones that you mentioned?
Right. So startups, yes, there are of course startups. And startups, at least the ones that I have been interacting with, mostly are companies that would take mature technology from the open source platforms of the
Gotcha.
company and find use cases and solutions for them. Right. So you whether that's in the hospitality industry, right? We're seeing companies here that provides hospitality solutions for hotels, right? Where you can have a smart hotel room solution based on either a Xiaomi system or Baidu system. You see companies that would take a matured platform and integrate it into the senior care industry, and so you will see startups that would take these technologies and really finding use cases for them.
Gotcha. Are there any startups that are working on their own proprietary NLP, ASR engines or anything like that, or is more kind of along the lines that you said, where it's just kind of repurposing some of the bigger tech to niche industries that maybe the bigger companies, of course, could never hope to enter because they have so many other different things going on?
Right. I think that depends on how you define a startup, right? If
Yeah,
they've
that's
raised
true.
Series C, right? They've had $100 million versus $1 million, right? So definitely, we definitely still have companies that's privately owned and that's in the $100 million
Yeah.
valuation that works on sort of NLP and TTS and that front. But you also have very small 3-4 people teams or 10 people teams that really work on one-step solutions, right? So you certainly definitely have different companies working, apart from the large tech industries, working on voice. But certainly, I think that depends on how we define startups. So definitely for smaller
Right.
teams, they are focused on finding solutions and using existing technologies to enhance current use cases.
Gotcha. And that actually is another good segue into my next question too. I know when we were talking a couple weeks ago to prepare for this, you mentioned really wanted to dive into some use cases. So what are some practical or interesting use cases that you can share from your experience working in voice tech in China? And I know there's the one example that you and I often talk about, but before we get into that one, are there any others that you can think of that would be really interesting to kind of display some solid use cases and compelling reasons for people to use it that you've seen out in China?
I mean, there are some fun ones, right? I mean, definitely, certainly some what we've talked about, but there's something that I've just really interacted with very, very recently, and I think you'll like this one. But starting this year, China has really put a focus on its recycling program and trash sorting program. And that's got a lot of consumers confused because China hasn't initially, we've always had sort of recycling centers, but it was not enforced as it was this year. So a lot of consumers begin to, people are confused, what is my leftover dinner considered as, what's my plastic bottle
Right.
considered as. But suddenly overnight, there's a very comprehensive trash system, and consumers are having a hard time learning and adapting to it. And just actually this week, I started to see trash sorting sort of assistants being built outside of public trash disposals.
That's awesome.
So these are these large. Let me describe this to you. The one that I've interacted with, right? It's a quite a large. It's not a robot, right? It's a pole with a camera and some light bulbs, LED lights fitted on top of it. that points towards the trash can. Initially, I thought it was just going to be a camera that records, if you've done something wrong, find you and find you, right? But this yesterday I went to the trash can, and it started to talk to me, and it said it did a quick word and asked me what my trash, which trash can my trash belongs to. So there was this robot that you can talk to, that you can ask, which category of trash my trash belongs to, and I thought that was quite an interesting use case. It's by far not perfect. There is quite a lot of lag because it is outside. It has to be cellular, and it's not that fast, right? But you begin to see the potential of voice.
Right. Well, and it's interesting you bring up that use case, because I would even say, in the U.S. and I'm sure other parts around the world, people still have a really hard time knowing what they can recycle, what they can't, what they can throw away, what they can't. And I mean, I can envision, something like that being in every, maybe in somebody's home, or maybe in every public dumpster area, just something that allows people to more effectively sort their trash. That's really fascinating, Lawrence.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's quite fun, right? I think instead of a record and find model, right? It's something that is proactive as this, I think is very helpful. And not just in trash sorting, right? In other industries as well. I think, speaking of public space, right? Robots in shopping centers that help you find directories, that's becoming quite popular. You start to see a lot of that popping up in especially busy and large malls, where there are robots that you can really talk to find directions and recommendations, right? And these robots will actually, they will actually move around and say, hey, check me out, and hey, let's have a conversation. We're seeing. Just a few weeks ago, there was a comic expo in Chengdu, I believe, and Baidu actually launched one of their robots. They're sort of a human-sized. It's not a humanoid, right? It's still a sort of a cylinder-shaped robot that's on wheels that sort of start to move around and starting to interact with people. So I think we're starting to see more use cases in the public space.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You bring up the robot example, because that makes me think back to November of last year. I was flying out to Thailand to go participate in an event and participate in a panel. But in order to get to Thailand from the U.S., I had to connect in South Korea at Seoul Incheon International Airport. So, that was my first, I guess, the first time I stepped foot into Asia. But I remember walking through the airport in Incheon, and I had one of those. It was a robot. It came up to me. It had a face, and it had like a cylindrical body, and it just rolled up to me and started interacting with me. And honestly, I think probably appearing to other people, I probably looked like I was freaking out because I didn't know what to do. But I think it was trying to give me directions to something, but I just kind of stood there to try and figure it out, and then I just kind of walked away clicking. I could tell other people were kind of snickering at me, and probably well deserved. But yeah, I mean, we're the fact that is starting to be more of a use case, and we're starting to see more applications of voice, whether in robotics or not, and in public places like that, I think is only going to continue.
Right. Look, right. It's not by far perfect, but at least it's giving us a glimpse into what is possible. And I think that's really something that I've been quite fascinated with. It's the ability for people to interact with voice assistants in the public setting, right? Where you previously, it's more of a private setting interaction. And now, with the technology becoming more accessible, with it becoming more mature, you are seeing use cases being applied to more public space and public usages. And I think other use cases, right? I think some very interesting ones sort of emerged with the pandemic. I think there's quite an interesting term that got coined, right, here, at least here in China, which is the sort of the touchless economy. It's quite an interesting term. We don't know exactly how long it's gonna stick, right? I think it's sort of a momentary thing. We're at the moment of the pandemic, and that's sort of a totally touch-based economy, touchless economy. I think it's going to start to drift away when the pandemic ends, but it will still have some impact. Right, the idea that you start to interact with other people, with other companies, more through a digital way, and then certainly voice becomes quite a big factor of that.
Yeah, and speaking of, I like the touchless economy. That rolls off the tongue, and I think that could launch a lot of good marketing campaigns, Lawrence. But with that in mind, one of the use cases that I do want to talk about is the voice activated elevator,
Of
because
course.
that's a no-brainer use case, right? And I know that's one that you and I have talked about a lot as to why have we gone so many years with having to physically touch buttons on an elevator. And you said there are some different use cases out in China of touchless elevators, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it began as pilot programs very earlier in the year, right? When the pandemic broke out in China, and as it started to recover, people started to look at, okay, touching obviously is a way to transmit this disease, and if people are going back to work, going back to school, that could be a major way how the disease is going to be transmitted. So why not use a voice solution to replace some of that public, to replace some of this, areas where you used to touch. So elevator is definitely one of the big things, right? People are crowded into a small space. People are touching buttons constantly. That's quite that's a way for disease to transmit. So voice-based, voice-controlled elevator was a pilot program that was coined by several big companies, and we have begun to see some piloting programs of voice-enabled elevators where you can go into an elevator and tell the elevator which floor you want to go to. And in more advanced cases, it acts more like a smart speaker where you can start to ask for the news of the day, weather, and things like that. That of course we are not seeing nationwide rollouts of that technology. We're seeing some piloting programs, and whether or not that's going to be a technology that's going to stay and roll out, I think only time will tell.
I cannot wait for that to go mainstream, personally.
Oh, absolutely. I think that could be quite a fun and useful way for voice tech to work. But of course, I think beyond the sort of the fun use case that we talked about, I think there are still some more serious applications of voice that I think have really benefited. Especially,
and you bring up education a lot, right? How in light of the pandemic and kids being home more, and voice coming into the fold here to really help in the education of children. Are there any specific use cases that you can think of when it comes to education? Are there any different voice applications that are helping with education, or is it still kind of we're figuring it out experimental phase right now?
Right. So in China, right, we have a lot of edtech startups, edtech companies. So education is a big part of the tech industry here in China. And when the pandemic broke out, or before the pandemic, right, education companies already began to work with smart speaker providers and tech companies to start transforming some of their contents that used to exist mainly on mobile and on tablets into smart speakers. So onto smart displays. That's not a very difficult transition, right? Because from tablet to smart display, it's quite an easy transition. But once the pandemic broke out, with kids being stuck at home, and some of their parents, especially a lot of the kids, their parents work on the front line of the pandemic. They are nurses, doctors, and other essential workers. So with these kids at home, they might not be able to learn with their parents, right? So they have to have some sort of technology that they can interact with. And smart display become quite a good tool for that. One is because we come back to the price points, right? So it's quite cheap for anyone. Anyone can purchase one. It's much cheaper than a tablet and much cheaper than a smartphone. The second one would be, how do you use a smart display, right? With a tablet, not all kids, especially younger kids, might know how to interact with a tablet, with a smartphone. But with a smart display, things are all voice-based. So, the interaction is a very natural interaction. And you're starting to see companies rolling out kids-focused smart displays, that has sort of a time lock on it, or, however you call it. Where kids can only interact with it for a certain amount of time and can only interact with certain kind of contents. So parents can be rest assured, right? Kids are only interacting with, they're not overly interacting with this piece of technology. And in general, parents are more willing for their kids to interact with voice than sort of just with a sort of touch and screen case. And this year also, we're seeing more tech companies, instead of transferring their contents directly to a voice-first platform, they are beginning to design more contents that's based on sort of the conversational nature of voice itself.
Yeah, I can definitely see voice beginning to play a larger role rather in education just overall. And I think all of the examples you just shared are an excellent testament to that. And I can even think back, I did a talk a couple of weeks ago to it was a youth summer camp it was a STEAM camp, which I think
Right.
science, technology, engineering, mathematics. I think they're putting art in there now, so it's called STEAM. But I was brought in to kind of show the students who were anywhere from like 8 to 10 years old how to build a basic Alexa skill. And one of the ones I showed them how to do was how to create your own flashcards on Alexa. And their eyes lit up. You wouldn't believe when I showed them how easy it was first to do this using something like Alexa skill blueprints, but then the fact that they could learn easier, they could create their own experience to be able to help them interpret and understand the information easier. So I agree with you. I think education is going to be a huge part of the evolution of voice, and I'm happy to hear that that seems to be occurring as we speak in China.
Yes, I agree. I think that's also one of the early use cases of voice where it's really taken traction, and we're seeing quite a lot of that going on.
So, what is the role that you think IoT and IoT devices? I know we've talked a bit about that beyond just smart speakers. Of course, smart speakers are the most dominant device that houses these voice assistants right now. But what do you think, IoT and different IoT devices, the role that they will play in the adoption of voice across China over the long term? And are there any current examples that you can share? I know you kind of alluded to some, but just the role that you think IoT overall is going to play in the evolution of voice in China specifically.
Of course, I think as we talked earlier, right, IoT is quite an important sort of racetrack for voice tech providers, because there is data showing if a consumer started to get into your sort of your IoT ecosystem, they are more likely to stick with your sort of your voice tech ecosystem. So it's really a way to really increase consumer loyalty, especially given the very competitive landscape that we have here in the voice market. So I think moving forward, at least what I think personally would be that interacting with smart home and with IoT will move away from just smart speakers.
Mm-hmm.
You will start to have smart home devices with their own ability to converse in their own unique verticals. You will be able to start to you will be able to
Yeah.
converse with your fridge with matters of cooking and matters
Right.
of health and dieting. So I think you will start to see more IoT devices that begin to have their own ability to converse with the consumers, and smart speakers no longer becoming sort of the central way. Of course it will still become the center in which all of the IoT is connected, but you will start to see more
Right.
individual devices that has the ability of their own to process and to converse with consumers.
Right. Smart speakers won't ultimately be the standard for hardware like we see now with voice assistant tech, and I think that's starting to kind of ripple and permeate its way across the voice community and the voice industry now. Is I think we're all finally we're all realizing that these smart speakers are just the entry point, right? Because there's going to be this whole ecosystem of different devices, and of course as technology gets better and cheaper and more efficient, there is undoubtedly going to be something that comes in to replace that. I'm looking forward to the future, to your point about smart homes, where my home can just be constructed with an IoT device in the walls or microphones or whatever, and I can just walk into my home and activate my voice assistant that does all this different stuff. That's the world
Absolutely.
I want to live in, and I think we'll
I mean,
get there.
absolutely. I think we are very. I mean, we have the technology to do that. I think, we will start to see that becoming the case over the years. I think it's individual. I think once IoT devices have the ability to converse on their own, I think it will unlock more potentials, especially with consumers. If I am talking to if I am at my fridge, and that at that moment when I open my fridge and I see that I'm missing milk or some or vegetables, I can talk directly at that moment. I think the ability to make decisions on the moment, I think that could make some quite large effects to the market.
Absolutely. So How do you envision the future of voice tech then? Do you think the technology will ultimately break free of these siloed ecosystems that we currently see around the world? And by siloed ecosystem, I'm talking about, Amazon with Alexa, Google with Google Assistant, and then of course, in the context of what's available in China, the Baidu Assistant and the Alibaba Assistant. Do you see us eventually breaking free of these siloed ecosystems, or do you think we're still in the long haul for seeing things siloed in the way that they are now?
Of course, I think I see, in my personal opinion, two sort of long-term directions that voice could go. It's definitely in the case of the Chinese market. One is as you mentioned, with the voice assistant. I think we will begin to see more sort of independent voice assistant being created by companies and brands. That has their own personality, that has their own sort of verticals that they're good at. But of course, I think a lot of this will still rest upon ecosystems and technologies that's being created by these large tech companies. But in the case of it would no longer be a hey Alexa, it would be hey something else.
Right.
But the underlying technology will still be provided by one of the larger tech companies. I think brands will start to recognize the importance voice assistants will have on their brands, and the importance of having a voice identity. I think brands, once that becomes the case, brands will start to develop their own sort of voice personality, their own voice assistant. They might, if they have the means to do that, they might be able to invest in their own technology from the ground up. But I think that's unlikely. Certainly for the majority of brands and companies, I think most of them will still rest upon existing infrastructures that's already been created. But I would see, I do think there, we will see more independent voice assistants and personality being developed. Another thing that I think we will see is something that I also mentioned earlier, is that transition from private space to public space. Whereas voice assistant was really a personal interaction you have at home, in your car, sort of in an enclosed space, right? It's still quite a weird sort of thing you would do, if you start to sort of out of nowhere, out in the public space, start to talk to air, right? Whether you're talking to your wearable or talking to a robot, right? There's still that taboo of talking to an object. But as that technology gets better and gets more human-like, I think we will see a transition of voice interactions happening beyond just within the private space, but moving into the public. So whether that's shopping centers asking for directories, but I think that will become more and more permeable of voice interactions in the public space.
Yeah, I agree with every single point you just made there, specifically the one about brand identities when it comes to voice, because I think that's the biggest thing that I've noticed, especially being in our company, Red Fox AI, 100% right now, is that the brands that we do talk with, I think they get it, but I think it's that piece of, do we have to use Alexa? Do we have to use Google Assistant? Do we have to give up that part of our brand identity to somebody else? I think it's one of the biggest hurdles right now. And if there was, more of an ecosystem where, to your point, they could just spin up their own unique voice assistant that, may or may not already use kind of the underlying engines that drive a voice assistant to actually function and communicate with us, I think we're going to see a lot more of that. And I really think that too is what the future of this industry will be entirely. And I think there's a lot of value that is just waiting in the wings there to be grasped by anybody who chooses to grasp it, right?
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. I think that could really have a beneficial impact, not just on businesses but also to consumers, and having that really personal and interactive experience with the brands you already love, and with new brands that you find.
Awesome. Well, Lawrence, as we kind of wind our conversation down here, I always like to end on this question with any guest that I bring on the show. But what is one thing that you think someone can do today to begin leveraging voice technology, either personally or within their organization?
I think certainly, going back to the brand factor, right? Earlier, when I started with the CNSA V, one of the things I wanted to do was to engage more brands into using voice assistants, or engaging companies outside of the voice tech industry to embrace voice technology. But earlier in the year, earlier in the space, companies outside of the industry were quite skeptical of the value that voice could bring to them. But we are beginning to see, as consumer adoption of voice increases, as voice become no longer just a novelty item, but becoming more and more of a necessity,
Right.
brands should begin looking at least of their voice strategy. I know that's definitely happening out in the US and in Europe, certainly, but that's still quite a slow development here in China.
Yeah.
So that's something that I've been working towards, certainly here from the association perspective, to encourage more brands and more businesses to adopt to voice and to certainly have a voice strategy for the brand. So I think that's something that I would encourage for companies to do.
No, I think that's an incredibly good point because it all begins with strategy, right? It all begins in where does the puzzle piece fit into the overall puzzle, right? What problem are you solving? How can it be leveraged appropriately? I think that is excellent advice because that truly is the first step I think every organization needs to be, thinking about as they consider adopting this technology. So I think that's an excellent point. But Lawrence, this has been an incredible conversation, and I've enjoyed chatting with you so much. If anybody wanted to reach out to you or get in touch with you, what are some of the best ways for them to go about doing so?
Absolutely. I love to always have a good conversation. This is a rapidly changing industry, so there's always new to talk about. So that's why I find it so exciting. So certainly, I'm always open to chatting with people. They can find me on LinkedIn, and they can email me. Lawrence.lin@cnsaaudio.org, and I'm always open for good conversation.
Fantastic. Well, Lauren, again, it's been an absolute pleasure getting to chat with you. And I know since you and I are mutually involved in the Open Voice Network, I know we will be chatting again soon.
Absolutely. And I look forward to that.
All right. Take care, Lawrence. Thanks.
You as well. Bye.
Artificial
Intelligence.
voice recognition, machine learning.
Robotics.
You've been listening to the Artificial Podcast with your host, Nick Myers. To stay up to date with all our latest episodes, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and Google Podcasts. To learn more about how your organization can benefit by unlocking the power of AI and voice, visit www.redfox-ai.com. Until next time.